What's up, guys? We have surprisingly made it all the way to the end of 2023. So today I'm going to be ranking every single comic book movie that came out this year, from the worst to the best. Before we get into the ranking, make sure to subscribe and like this video. And yeah, let's just get into the ranking. Alright, so starting off in last place at the bottom of the list is Shazam! Fury of the Gods. Now, this was just a huge disappointment of a movie. There was barely any redeeming qualities about this one. The jokes didn't land, the characters weren't as good, the villains were super boring and mid, and just the ending of the movie, the way that went with Shazam dying and then them bringing him back to life and Wonder Woman showing up and all that stuff, it was just all so random and super mid, like just from beginning to end. There's nothing that was truly memorable about this movie except for that one fight scene with Shazam versus the dragon. That was pretty much the only cool thing about this movie. And yeah, just the jokes are all bad. They mess up the characters, and it's just nothing like the first movie. It doesn't have that fresh, fun feel to it. I just really didn't like Shazam! Fury of the Gods. Next up on our list is Merry Little Batman. This was like an hour 20-minute Batman holiday special, and it was pretty fun for the first half an hour. Damian Wayne's kind of charming, and I kind of like the animation of the film. But man, this movie extended its welcome by a mile. It was so long, and it dragged out so much, and after like 40 minutes, I got super bored, and watching the rest of the movie was a complete chore. Like, it just was way too long. I feel like if they made it like 40-30 minutes, it would have been much better, but they dragged it out way too long, and it was just really hard to sit through after the first 30 to 40 minutes. But there were some cool moments, there's some good jokes, but overall it just was way too long and not really memorable. Next up on the list, at my number 9 spot, it was kind of back and forth between the film that was ahead of it, but at my number 9 spot, it's going to be Blue Beetle. And I really like Jolo in the role. I think he's a great actor, and he really gave a lot of charm and charisma to the Blue Beetle character, but the entire movie just is so generic. It's the most generic superhero movie. It's not memorable in pretty much any way. The only thing carrying the film is Jolo and his acting and charisma as the character. And, you know, the family elements were nice, but it just didn't fully work in the end for pretty much the entire film. It was super generic. The fight scenes were kind of bad. The villain is so forgettable. Don't even remember anything about the villain. And yeah, Blue Beetle just ends up being another mid-DC movie in the end, and that's kind of disappointing. Then next up on the list, very close with Blue Beetle, is AntMan the Wasp: Quantumania. And honestly, I don't hate this one as much as most people. It's still a pretty mid and forgettable superhero movie, but there are some redeeming qualities, with the comedy still kind of working for this third Ant-Man movie, and King the Conqueror being absolutely amazing in this film. He's a total badass, and Jonathan Majors does a really great job with the character. But yeah, for the rest of the film, super mid, super forgettable. Wasp being a title character, she's barely in the movie. Cassie's super annoying, don't like anything they did with her character. There's some just weird plot lines in there that were just thrown in there, and it just ends up falling on its feet. And then MODOK here was a big issue. I mean, they totally messed up how he looked and just the entire story of MODOK. So even though it could have been a great villain to reintroduce into the MCU, it just was really ruined in this movie, and they messed that up pretty hard. So yeah, Quantumania, even with some good elements, it still falls flat as an incredibly mid MCU movie. Next up on the list, we got Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, and honestly, this was a little better than I was expecting. After all the delays, all the reshoots, and all the cancellations, it just turned out to be another generic DC film, but it still had its moments, actually. The comedy was great in this movie, almost as good as the first. The brother relationship between Aquaman and Orm was pretty good in this movie, and there was a couple quite redeeming qualities about it. The soundtrack was great, the music used throughout the film was really good. But all that aside, it's still another super generic, super mid DC film. And Black Manta is not as memorable as he was in this film. The rest of the villain with Necris and that whole Lost Kingdom part was super dumb. Some of the CGI fights are pretty trash. There's just so much here that's very forgettable. Even though there are good moments and good entertainment inside of this film, it just ends up being totally forgettable and just not something that I'll probably ever go back to. Next up on the list, there's a pretty big gap between this and Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. But yeah, next up on the list at the number 6 spot, it's going to be The Marvels. And honestly, this was a pretty surprising one for me. I thought this was going to be a complete flop for me. But honestly, I actually quite enjoyed it. There's some great comedy, there's some great character moments, and I like the relationship build up with the three Marvels in this movie. Honestly, I thought there was just some fun to be had here. Of course, the whole villain plotline, the whole rest of the story is super mid, but honestly, I'm not even gonna lie, Brie Larson was pretty good in this movie. She's trash in the first Captain Marvel, but in here she actually shows some charisma, and she actually seems like she wants to be Captain Marvel in this movie. So that's pretty good. I feel like there's a lot of charm there with Miss Marvel too, and I had fun with the group. There's a lot of stuff that could be done better. I mean, the fight scenes were really bad, and there's tons of forgettable moments. I barely remember what the plot of the movie was about. But with this squad, I quite enjoyed that. Kicking off the top 5 is going to be a film that you probably didn't know was a comic book movie, and that's David Fincher's The Killer. This was actually a comic book movie. It's based off of a comic book, so it had to be included on this list. And yeah, this was actually a pretty fun little thriller. There's not much to it. It's just a very simple story, but it's really cool to see things from the killer's perspective, as he is an assassin. And it's just really interesting to see what's going on when he's about to make the kill. So I just thought there was a lot of really cool elements in how the film is told on a story level. Even though it is pretty forgettable, I don't really remember much about it, even though I watched it like only a month ago. But watching it is very entertaining. There's some really cool elements to it, and Michael Fassbender, he's also really great in the lead. So The Killer, it's a pretty solid action thriller. At my number 4 spot is going to be a film that most people didn't really like, but I actually thoroughly enjoyed it, and that is The Flash. Even though it's bad with the CGI, this film actually really works on a story level and with its characters. I feel like the story of the Flash yearning for more time with his mom is something that's very precious. It's a very emotional story, and they actually do that quite well throughout this film. Even though there's some elements that kind of overthrow this with its big action, bad CGI, all that bad plot lines, all that stuff, at its core, it's a story about Barry wanting to spend more time with his mom, and that's a very emotional story, and they actually do that quite well. Also in here, there's some great characters with Batman, Michael Keaton returning. He's really great. And honestly, Ezra Miller is really great as the Flash in this movie. Even if he's not a great person, he is a great actor, and I really enjoyed him in this movie. There's a lot of cool elements in here, and the comedy absolutely slaps. There's some great jokes, great one-liners in this movie. Some just really fun moments, and I think this is just a really fun movie. Kicking off the top 3 is going to be Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem. This was an absolute banger of a movie. The animation's stunning, the characters are amazing, and the family dynamics are really special in this movie. There's just a whole lot to love about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem, and it's just a lot from what I love about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The camaraderie, the teenagerness about this movie. It actually feels like they're real teenagers just like me, and it's pretty relatable. I honestly really love what they did with these characters. I love some of the moments in here. The action is so sick in this animation style. Superfly is a really cool bad guy, and there's just so many moments in here that are just so memorable, so cool. And one particular, the No Diggity action scene, one of the coolest action scenes of the year. Honestly, on par with some of the John Wick Chapter 4 action scenes, which is pretty crazy to say. But that scene was so cool with the clean transitions. I mean, there's just so many cool moments in this movie. So many great jokes as well. The comedy is slaps. And these kid voice actors are actually pretty good in the roles. Maybe they sound a little bit too young, but I feel like it just totally works in the end. A couple of small little issues here and there, and I didn't really like what they were doing with April's character and how she fit in the role. Other than that, this was an absolute banger of a movie, and I completely loved it. Now, with the final 2 movies on this list, I was going back and forth with them for quite some time, and it is really hard to put one above the other. But at this point in time, my runner-up is going to be Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. And man, this is just a purely spectacular movie. From a visual standpoint, from an action standpoint, from a story standpoint, it's just absolutely amazing. Other than that cliffhanger ending, where it just doesn't really feel like a full movie, it is an awesome half movie. I mean, as a half story, Across the Spider-Verse has everything you want. Beautiful animation, beautiful scenes, amazing cameos, some really cool moments with Miles and his story, and how he just wants to do his own thing and be his own person, and I just think that's so cool. So many really great Spider-Man in here that just add to the entire fun part of this movie. So many great jokes in here as well. I mean, Spider-Man India, he's super fun. Spider-Punk is really great as well. And then honestly, talking about Gwen's story, it's actually quite emotional as well. The kind of little issue I had in here was just how reactive Gwen's dad was to her being Spider-Man. Like, he was ready to arrest her, which I feel like is a little bit out of character and just didn't really fit. Like, even if we don't know him, we don't think an own dad would arrest his daughter just because she's Spider-Gwen, right? Like, it's kind of stupid for that element. But the entire rest of the movie, beautiful animation, great comedy, great characters, great story. It just all works pretty well. So that just leaves one final movie, and my number 1 pick for the best comic book movie of 2023 is going to be Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And even though I was going back and forth between Guardians 3 and Across the Spider-Verse, I feel like I had to put Guardians 3 at my number one because it is just a completion of a beautiful trilogy, and that's what makes it so special. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is the perfect ending to one of the best movie trilogies I've seen. I mean, every way that it ends off each character, giving them their own beautiful ending for their journey. It just works on pretty much every level. It closes out each story in such a nice way. And even though I feel like I didn't like how it was leaving room for more with that post-credit scene in the New Guardians, didn't really like that. I feel like the way that they left it off before the credits was just absolutely perfect, and it was just absolutely beautiful. Other than the way it ended, there's just so many beautiful moments in here with these characters. Rocket's backstory just really hurting so much, really bringing the tears. There's just so many great things about this. The High Evolutionary is a great villain. I mean, you totally hate him, but that's what makes a great villain, someone that you can truly hate. And High Evolutionary does that. There's just so many great things about this movie. It's hard to mention. Great comedy, great action, great moments. Just, I feel like those moments, they stick with you. Just Lila dying, that's a moment that sticks with you. The hallway fight scene, that's a moment you'll remember. The entirety of the team splitting up at the end and the emotion to that, that's just a pure moment that you'll remember. And yeah, it's just about those moments, and that's what makes a film so special, and that's what Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 did. And not to mention the soundtrack, which is absolutely amazing and adds so much more to the film. An amazing soundtrack, especially with, Creep, that acoustic version at the beginning, and then The Dog Days Are Over. That final scene absolutely gives me chills with everyone just being happy, That's the happy ending for the Guardians of the Galaxy. And, even though we're all expecting someone to die and to hit with that kind of emotion, it just hit with the emotion of the team splitting up, but still, keeping that happiness and that last happy moment with the team. Absolutely super special. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, the best comic book movie of 2023. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Share your list down below. Make sure you subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.